Hi everyone, it's Kelly from Kellie's Bead Boutique. So when I first started YouTube, I created this Czech glass bracelet and it's been one of my more popular videos. The only problem with it was that I didn't do a kit. And the reason I didn't was I had to use a lot of beads in that kit. And when you guys buy my kits, you buy me out. I can't even keep them in stock. And sometimes it's hard to get in lots of stock of the same colors in Czech glass fire polish. So I've revamped it, so I'm using just a little bit less. I've come up with 3 really cute colorways that I think you guys are going to really love. So if you want to see what I'm making today, come and join me. So to make our project today, we're going to be using about 32 inches of 2mm leather. I have 60 4mm fire polish. I'm going to be using one of our barrel knot tubes. We'll be using a little bit of super new glue. We'll also be using some 24 gauge craft wire. I've got some small jump rings, a toggle, some glue in ends, and for our tools, we're going to be using a pair of cutters, our chain nose pliers, and our bent chain nose pliers. So let's get started. I've cut myself about 30 inches of my wire, and what I'm going to do on one end is just take a pair of pliers and just make sort of a little turn. All I want is something that's going to prevent the beads from flying off the end. Now, I've got 3 different colorways in this project. 2 of them are going to be a pattern one, where you're going to be using 2 beads, and then you're going to put on one of the different color. So you put 2 and then a different color, and then 2 and then a different color, because you'll get 40 of one and 20 of the other. But in this particular color, I just think these are fabulous. I call them oil slick. I know they're called metallic something or other, but my supplier doesn't give me names, so I get to make up my own. And I thought this looked just like, you know how in an oil slick you see all those different colors? And that's what this looked like to me, so that's why I called it oil slick. I just think these are fabulous, and they didn't need to go with anything else because we get all the different purples and browns and blues and greens and everything in this one. So we're just going to load all of these beads on. If you choose the other colors in your kits, you'll do 2 of one color and 1 of the other one. So I'm just going to load these up and I will be right back. Okay, so I've got all of my beads on my wire, and now I know this is far too much wire, but I like to give you a little bit extra in your kits because wire is notorious for kinking in the wrong places. So if you get a kink up here when we're about to start and you need a little bit extra, all you have to do is push your beads down and you'll have plenty of wire. So I always think it's better to have a little more than a little less. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be wrapping this around here. So what I'm going to do is leave myself a couple inches of wire, and I'm going to put it next to the barrel knot tube. And this thing comes in handy for all kinds of things. Now, it would also work if you had a knitting needle and not a barrel knot tube, but it's just what I had. And I thought, well, you're going to get one in the kit anyway, so let's utilize it. So I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to place it between the wire and the tube so I've got a good grip on something. And it's just to get this started is a little awkward. So I'm going to slip down some of the beads here. And this is why we want to have that little thing in the end, because you don't want your beads to end up all over the floor. So now I'm going to use my thumbnail as a bit of resistance, and I'm going to push with this thumbnail so that I get these in there tight. You see how they're not loose like that? They're nice and snug. Now I can wrap around like that. So I just wrap around as far as I can go, and then I'm going to slip down some more beads. So I just slip down as many as are sort of comfortable in my hand, and I'm going to wrap that around. And then what I'm going to do now is just take that end and just kind of give it a little bend like that, because we don't want these beads falling off the end. Now I'm going to take the tube and just sort of push it up so I've got a little bit more of a tool to work with. So we just keep repeating this process. So give it some resistance. You have to push against it so that you've got all of your beads nicely sort of snugged up there. Otherwise this doesn't really turn out well. So you can see how I'm sort of pushing against, and we're creating our nice little spiral. And you will see that beads will start to come off the end there. So you can just kind of wrap it around a little bit, but we can fix that all up later. Okay, so I'm just about done here. I've got a couple more that I need to do. So we create our resistance and then wrap around. And this looks a little more awkward than it actually is. It's much easier to do these things when I'm not on camera, but you can see I can just sort of keep pushing this tube up, just sort of push it up there. And then we've got our little exposed tube there. Okay, so this is the last one. So just make sure you're nice and tight and just wrap all the way to the end. So now we've got our little tube of beads there, and we can get rid of this barrel knot tube for now. So there you go. Now I'm going to take my leather and I'm just going to fold it in half and I'm going to cut it. And of course, yes, scissors would be great, but I don't have any. So I'm using my cutters. So now we're going to make a barrel knot. So I'm going to go about 2 to 3 inches down, and then I'm going to make my first barrel knot. So I want to make sure my ends are equal, and then I'm going to place my barrel knot tube in between, and I'm going to give that a wrap. So I'm going to do a 3 wrap. So I go take my most outer one and go under and around, working towards my left hand. So I've got 3 nice neat wraps. I'm going to take the one that I was wrapping with and put it through the back end of the tube. I'm going to pop that little tube off and pull that out. So normally I would tighten this right up. I would get it nice and snug. But what I'm going to do is try and hide the wire with this a little bit. So I want to leave it just a little bit undone there, but enough so that it doesn't fall apart. So I want to make sure everything's nice and even, and then get these kind of almost snugged up, but not quite. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the end of the leather, and what I do is I just kind of meet them up. It's a little bit easier to get this in here. And I want to start on this end. I just find it easier to work with my beads coming towards me versus away. It's just the way that my brain thinks. So I'm going to come in this end, and I want to put both of those through. And you might have to sort of straighten that out. There we go, just kind of pops right through. So one end is going to be longer than the other because when we do barrel knots, it makes them uneven. Okay, so now what I want to do is take this end of the wire and I want to wrap it around the leather here, just these 2 pieces of leather. I want to make sure that you guys can see everything. So I'm going to move all this stuff. So I'm going to take this little piece here and I'm going to wrap it really close to that barrel knot. And I'm just going to wrap it a few times. And all I'm doing is securing that, so it doesn't have to look like anything special. Now I'm going to come in and carefully cut that wire away. Now I'm going to take my chain nose pliers and just push down on that little bit of wire that's poking up there. You don't want that sticking out. Okay, so now we can really tighten up that barrel knot. So I'm just going to move these beads down, and then I'm going to find the piece of leather that will tighten it up. And let's see, it's not that one, it's that one. So I just want to tighten that up over top of that little bit of wire there. And you just kind of move it around and pull. Sorry, I'm pushing and pulling because I don't want to destroy this. So I'm sort of pulling on the leather down this way, and then I'm pushing up like that. So there we go. So if it shows a little bit, it doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. All we wanted to do was really secure that in there. So now I'm going to take this end and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to wrap it around a couple times to secure. So just wrap it around 3 times, and then I'm going to give that a little trim. And now if I've got a little burr, I'm just going to tuck that down. Now I want to create another barrel knot. So I'm going to look for my longer piece because there's 2 different lengths here. So I've got my longer one on top, and I'm going to take my tube and place it in between and take the top one and come underneath and towards me and go around once, twice, 3 times. And then I'm going to take that tail and go through the back end of the tube. A lot of people ask me, well, which end do you go through? You always want to go through the back end. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a piece of leather over top. And we don't want that. We don't want to see the leather. It should be internal. Okay, so now when we're going to tighten up this barrel knot, we want to make sure we scoosh it down as far as we can get it before we tighten it up, because we want to cover over that last little bit of wire that we used on our wrap. So just kind of cover up what you can here. And you know, this wire is super malleable, so this one's sticking out a little bit. So I'm just going to force it down with my tool. There we go. Kind of cover it up a bit more there with our leather, and then tighten up. So, and you'll find on this, with the barrel knots, one will tighten and the other won't. So you kind of have to play around a little bit to get it right where you want it. Now you can see we've got way too much leather on one side. It really doesn't matter. I just give you extra leather because it's way easier to make these barrel knots with more leather than a little bit less. You'll find you'll really struggle if you're trying to cheap out on your leather. So although it is wasteful, it's impossible to make these with just tiny little bits of leather. All right, so now what we want to do is kind of move these around. Now this one actually worked out really nicely, but what I do to kind of tighten it up is I just sort of twist these, and I just kind of come down and I'm twisting away from me, and I want them to sort of be even all over, but if they're not, it doesn't really matter because this is a really organic looking piece. So that's sort of what we're going for. We've just got our beautiful Czech glass in the middle and our barrel knots on either side. All right, so now we need to measure. So by the time we add on our toggle and our end caps and our jump rings, this whole little scenario is going to be about 1 inch of length. So if your wrist measures out at about 7 inches, then we want to make this about 6 inches, and that should give you what you need. Now it's a little bit awkward to measure because we have so many different lengths. So what I like to do is I like to measure this piece. So this ends up just over 2 inches. So I want to make this a 7-inch bracelet. So I need to make this entire piece 6 inches long. So because I want 6 inches and this is 2 inches, I need 2 inches of leather on either side of my barrel knots, and that should give me the length that I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my one barrel knot and go to the end, and I'm going to come up here and just kind of mark with my thumb, and I'm going to trim off 2 inches there. And I'm going to repeat on the other side. So put my barrel knot there and come up to the 2 inches and give that a trim. So now when I measure this, this should come out to 6 inches, which it does. Now, if you have a really teeny tiny wrist, like some people only have a 6-inch wrist, you don't want to end up with this sort of scenario because that's going to look really silly. So what I would do is if you have a really small wrist, is I would cut back the amount of beads that you put in here. So instead of 60, I might go down to something like 50 so that you end up with a smaller section. Otherwise, you're going to have too much on the top here and it's just not going to sit right on your wrist. Now, when you do put this on, you sort of have to mold it around a little bit, so it will take up a little bit of room, but I think maybe just go a little bit less if you have a really tiny wrist. All right, so now we're going to glue our ends on, and I'm going to be using some super new glue. You can use this or Loctite, or you can use GS Hypo. I just find with the GS Hypo that it's not an instant kind of thing, and you'll be waiting a couple hours for it to set. So I just want to put a little bit on the end, and then on the very tips of it. It doesn't look like very much glue, but this stuff does really hold. And then I'm going to take my end caps and pop them in there. Now, a good thing to do, which I didn't do, is to dry fit them to make sure they are going to fit. If you take them and you kind of push them over and they don't fit, you could trim them off. Now, the other thing is when you put this super new glue on your leather, it can make it swell up just ever so slightly. So you want to be fairly quick when you're getting your glue on there. You want to be fairly quick at getting your end caps on because once it starts to swell up, you'll have a heck of a time getting that on there. Now always make sure that you've got something to clean up a little bit of extra glue. I don't have anything, so I'm just going to use a little bit of my cut off leather just in case there's sort of an overflow of glue. It's just nice to remove a bit, although this does dry very clear. So I'm just going to let that set up for a minute and then I'll be right back. All right, so let's finish up this bracelet. So I'm going to add my toggle, and when I add that, I'm going to use 1 jump ring on one side and 3 on the other, and I'll explain as I do this. So to open them up, I'm going to put 1 tool on one side, and I turn my bent chain nose over so I've got a little more grip on that, and I just do an opposite. Now I'm going to put my jump ring through, and now I'm going to add the round end of my toggle. I'm going to get that in there, turn around my pliers, and close that up nice and tight. If you struggle with closing your jump rings, you can sort of jiggle them back and forth until they pop in there. Sometimes, like this one, isn't cooperating, so I just go over top of the whole thing and I give it a squench, and then it kind of pops right in where it needs to be. Now, the reason that I add 3 is because if you only add 1 jump ring to the working end of the toggle, it sometimes just doesn't want to go up inside the rounded end. It just puts too much stress on it, so I like to put 3. So I put 1 on, and then I have to add 1 more in there to give me that length that I need. And then I need one more to reorient the whole thing, because otherwise your toggle end is going to be the wrong way. So I'm going to just keep opening these up. So open up, and I'm going to go through the last one here. And I do want to make sure that these are going the right direction, because these are like a one-sided, so I've got that really pretty textured side. So I want to make sure that's going the right way. And then I'm going to come in and do that up nice and snug. So there you go, there's our completed pieces. There's the oil slick that I was working on today. And this one is actually a blue with a green. It's kind of hard to tell in the light here, but just that little bit of extra green gives it a little bit of dimension. I love the color of that one. And then of course, this is my favorite because I always love this color combo of turquoise and brown. And this is all in matte, so it looks great with this sort of beachy, distressed gray. I think it looks fabulous. So I hope you guys really like this one. It was fun to recreate my original piece, and I think it turned out really nice with the addition of the barrel knots. So if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give me a like, leave me a comment. I love to hear from everybody. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please make sure that you do so. I want to thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.